Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Thriving Adoptee podcast. So today I'm delighted to be joined by the first pediatrician that we've had on the show. We've done, 150, 160. Can't remember exactly how many episodes we've done, but we've never had a pediatrician on. And I wanted to address this whole really. So I reached out to some pediatricians a few weeks ago, and Bob was, I think, the first person that came back on that. So I'm delighted to have you on the show, Bob. Looking forward to our conversation today.
Oh, it's my pleasure. I'm really excited to be here.
Yeah. So Bob is a professor of pediatrics, and he's been at this a lot of years. So a wealth of experience that he's going to riff on. That was his words today to riff on. So one of the things that really got my attention, Bob, was the name of your book. Well, you've got a number of books, but one of those is called Conscious Parenting. And how did you get to that? How did you get to that title?
Well, that was a 20-year journey to that title. So let me give you the short synopsis of how I got there. Early in my career, I started in practice in 1979. Early in my career, I realized I wasn't paying back to the community like I felt like I should be, that I was doing my individual task, but I wasn't using my professional skills to be a good citizen. So I heard a talk. This was back in 1993. So that was sort of the genesis of a lot of this, that for anything happens in your community, you need to think of 12 words. I am the problem. I am the solution. I am the resource. Meaning that for anything that's going on, that drug problem, that violence problem, that what, I need to make it my personal problem. I need to be part of the solution. And to do that, I need to devote my resources to it. So I couldn't figure out how to do that. And finally went to the folks in the community and said, put me in, coach. I'm ready. I'm ready to be a good citizen. I'm ready to do good work. And that was things were going well. And then for me, the ultimate epiphany was April 20, 1999. In the United States, that was what is known as the Columbine Massacre. Two high schoolers went into a school, massacred 13 people, and killed themselves. How could that happen? And then I asked myself the introspective questions. Could it happen in my community? And the answer was yes. What have I done to make a difference? And the answer was not enough. So I sat down and wrote out what I considered to be the 5 steps to community improvement that each of us could be working on to make a difference. 1, learn to be the best parent you could be. And I chose those words carefully because parenting is a constant learning experience. You're always learning. If you're not learning, you're not paying attention. And the best parent you could be, not everyone has the same set of circumstances. Not everyone has the same intellectual circumstance. Not everyone has the same socioeconomic circumstances, mental health. So it's within your abilities being the best parent you could be. Number 2, get involved. So important for folks to get involved in their community. And there's so many different things. I didn't have a prescription for what somebody should specifically do, just get involved. Number 3 was related but different, and I think equally important, stay involved. It's tough to stay involved in things as things change. Number 4 was probably the most intuitive, but the most difficult, at least in our divisive society here in the United States, love for others. And number 5 was, I think, the most difficult in the journey of a lifetime, forgiveness. So I took those 5 steps and over the next 12, 13 years, wrote over 160 op-ed articles to the local newspaper about using those 5 steps. And those culminated in a book called My Children's Children, Raising Young Citizens in the Age of Columbine. So what that first 20 years was, okay, what's the goal of parenting for me? And what I came up with is raising your children to be good citizens. We oftentimes say, I want my children to be happy. My parents divorced. I remember my mother saying, Bob, I just want you to be happy. Fortunately for me, I didn't follow her words. I followed her deeds, because she was one of the ultimate good citizens. I think if you raise your children to be good citizens, happiness is a blissful secondary side effect. So one more piece of the puzzle before I get to conscious parenting. When I had to take I changed jobs late in my career, and I had to take a leadership course. And I said, I've been doing this my whole professional career, but okay, I'll take another leadership course. But like so many things, it helped me. What they talked about in conscious leadership was a line. And when you're above the line, you're open, you're receptive, you're ready to learn. When you're below the line, you're closed, you're defensive, you're always right. And the point is, we're all going to be above and below the line. We're humans. But to be a good conscious leader, you want to be above the line or recognize when you're below the line. And we've all been in that 3 o'clock meeting when we're just sitting there silently rolling our eyes, saying, when's this thing going to be over? I cannot stand another minute of this. So we're below the line. Now, if we recognize we're below the line, we can make a conscious effort to change, or we at least know that. What seemed intuitive to me, that the same line holds for parenting. And I call it the parental awareness threshold. When you're above the parental awareness threshold, you're open, you're receptive, you're ready to learn, you're ready to listen intently and engage with your children. When you're below the parental awareness threshold, you're closed, you're defensive, you're always right, because I said so, because I'm the parent. And we're going to be above and below that threshold. The whole point of conscious parenting is trying to recognize that and make changes either in the moment or in retrospect. And I'll pause and let you get a word in edgewise.
Yes, that's great, Bob. I love it. I'm going to pull together a couple of the threads from there. First off, you've talked about you talked about two things that really stood out for me. One is you used the word epiphany. And then, a couple of minutes into that, what you just said, and then you finished by talking about recognizing things, recognizing whether we're above or below the threshold. And for me, this is the ultimate thing, is what we see, because when we see better, we do better, and we are, I believe, as both sides of the pond, we're obsessed with doing better, and therefore we're looking for strategies. But what actually drives change for us is when we see better. So when we see more clearly, when we have an epiphany, as you said, and when we recognize when our behavior is a little bit off. So for me, it's everybody says, well, how do the question I hear all the time when I'm listening to podcasts is, well, somebody says da da da, and they say, well, how do I do this? And everybody jumps straight to the doing. Well, when we see more clearly, we do better as a natural part of the as a natural follow-on. Use the word byproduct, didn't you? I think use the byproduct of being a good citizenship. Being a good citizen is that you're happy. Well, seeing better, the byproduct of seeing better is doing better. But we live in a world that's kind of obsessed with doing stuff differently without the kind of the insights, the epiphanies, the aha moments, the change that drives behavior normally. So part of the thing with the Thriving Adoptees podcast is it's all about exploring what people have seen differently on their journeys, and the hope is that their catalysts, their epiphany moments, talking about those will drive epiphanies in the listeners.
And part of it then is the process. I mean, you want to see better, but so if I want to do better, how do I personally, what processes do I look at? And I spend some time in the book going over that, but in some ways I have a sort of a simplified 3-step process that is intuitive, that everyone thinks about, but it's, again, is helpful to remind yourself. One, whenever you're in a behavioral moment, that is, as a parent, we're always in behavioral moments with our children, pause, assess, and choose. Pause just because you have to pause. Don't do that knee-jerk reaction. Assess the situation and choose a response. In retrospect, you might have chosen the wrong response. But hopefully, if you pause, assess, and choose in the moment, you might be able to make a tangible change. But in retrospect, if you can be honest with yourself and say, you know, that yesterday did not go well. What could I have done better? And sometimes you can ask yourself, sometimes you can ask your partner, sometimes you can ask a sibling, a parent, just your pastor. There's so many people you can ask and help for advice. I'll give you a little anecdote. My youngest son, who's now 32, when he was about 7 or 8, one night he said something that really set me off, and I yelled at him. Not a proud dad moment, but I did it. He just melted. I mean, it was in a pile of tears. And my wife was mad at me for yelling. So we went into that family meltdown mode where nobody talks and just walks past each other for a couple hours. And then when it was time for bed, I laid down with my son and I said, son, I'm so sorry. I think you did something wrong. But Dad's response was totally inappropriate. And I want to tell you, I'm sorry. I want to apologize. And he said, Dad, would you be quiet? I said, why? He said, I hate it when you're nice. So I think I've sort of learned, I think I sort of had an inkling of this conscious parenting thing even decades ago in terms of trying to understand what I could do better. And I think the key to that interaction there is something that I said in my 5 steps: forgiveness. That's what we don't see enough of in our society. I don't know if you've seen or heard of the book called Tuesdays with Morrie. It's a great little book. It's written by a sports reporter over here. And he found out that his prize professor, college professor, was dying of amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, so did not have much time left. So he went to visit him every Tuesday to sort of learn his life's lessons. And one of the things was in terms of forgiveness, and I simplify again, in terms of forgiveness, forgive yourself first, forgive others, and do it now. Because that's so important. Sometimes you have to actually forgive yourself for what you've done. If you've done something, and from a parenting standpoint, you regret, but then you certainly have to forgive others or ask for forgiveness and do it now. There's no time like the present. Now that's obviously simplified because forgiveness is not, you can't snap your fingers and make it happen. It's a journey. You know, the kind of forgiveness you're able to practice at age 20, hopefully is very different than at 30, 40, 50, 60, 70. Hopefully you have evolved on this journey and understand your shared humanity and are willing to accept more and do more in a forgiveness journey.
Yeah. I think that's so true, isn't it? It is the journey, and it starts with ourselves. You know, I think in any relationship, whether that's a relationship with our child, our partner, our friend, it always starts with us. We've got a little bit more control over what we do than we've got over what they do, or a lot more. So it starts with ourselves. So for me, the idea of conscious parenting is this is about what we do as parents, not what our kids do, because it starts with us.
Yeah, and I think the whole point of conscious parenting is in the moment and in retrospect, each situation is unique. you might respond to what seemed to be the same set of circumstances on a Monday, 8 a.m., very differently than you would on Friday, 8 a.m., because of the set of circumstances might be you're getting ready for work, you're getting ready for school, and there's the hubbub, and somebody forgot to take the dog out or whatever. That might be different circumstances on Monday than on Friday, when as a parent you have an important meeting that you have to get to, or something. How you might, again, it's getting ready for work, getting ready for school, taking the dog out, getting breakfast, but you might react very differently, and you have to be conscious in the moment.
Yeah.
Each of those times.
Yeah. I've heard the above the line and the below the line talked about as well, and I heard it talked about in the same sense, but with some additional kind of additional kind of detail. So I thought that sharing those detail might help the audience in terms of that self-awareness piece, because it starts with ourselves. So above the line and the below the line, and I love the way that you've made this specific to parenting and talked about the threshold here. So I heard some what do they call them, mnemonics for it. I'm not sure if that's the right word. Anyway, they were or like a rowing oar, yeah, and then bed, as in where we sleep, right? So that helped me remember them. And it's funny, I learned this from in leadership like yourself, and I heard this probably about 2007, so I'm going back a long time, but the mnemonics helped me remember it. So or, as in a rowing oar, O for ownership, taking ownership of the situation, which I guess is a kind of a leadership thing. As you're a parenting, the parent is the leader, and they're taking ownership of the situation. Accountability, it's down to us. What people say, communication is the I've forgotten that one. Accountability, it's down to us. We're the parent, and then so we're the one that's going to make a change. And then I don't know how responsibility is different from accountability, but they are in awe was responsibility. And so when we can see ourselves taking ownership, taking accountability and taking responsibility, that's when we're above the line. And then quite important, actually, because we're not very good as the human race at catching ourselves doing things right, are we? We're good at catching ourselves doing wrong. Below the line, so essential to see when we're doing a good job and kind of pat ourselves on the back, so we can forgive ourselves, but we could also commend ourselves, I guess. And then below the line, the bed mnemonic was blame, excuses, and denial. So blaming our circumstances, blaming our child, blaming somebody else, blaming a teacher, whatever. Excuses, well, we're trying to get away with something that isn't quite right by making some sort of excuse, or denial, as in we're totally unaware of our own role or our own state of mind. And I've been seeing some of that denial from a friend of mine recently. And he's not doing well. He's off, right? His behavior's a little bit off. When I've said to him, you don't seem to be quite yourself at the moment. this was about six months or so ago, and he said, and he came straight back with, "I'm totally fine," right? And thanks for the offer, I'm totally fine. And I thought, bit of denial there. Anyway, 6 months later, the situation's got a little bit worse, and he's actually starting to become aware that he's got a challenge going on in his world. And then so he's moved past the denial, and now he is changing. He's changing. He's had a little insight and change. Yeah. So what do you make of those mnemonics? What could you add to that?
Oh no, I think those are spot on, and you can and so to me the whole parenting journey is also, and I have a chart in my book to sort of talking about if we talk about conscious awareness, there's tools, there's basic tools. That is, you have to accept instruction. You have to be willing to know that you don't know everything, and that instruction is always helpful, especially in parenting, even especially at my advanced age. And despite the fact that I consider myself an expert in parenting, I'm always learning and accepting instruction. I have to be actively engaged, and I have to be continually involved in this journey. There's no autopilot when it comes to parenting. So those are some of the basic things. And then the traits you have to have in terms of that are, I break them down in terms of parenting and citizenship, but they're really all together. I mean, you have to be, and again, we're going to be above and below the line. Sometimes we're going to exhibit these with exuberance, and sometimes we're going to not so good. I mean, patience, persistence, optimism, empathy, humility, sincerity. And I love the list is longer than that, but I'll stop with that. But the one thing I really love that I've learned in my journey is empathy. And I like the term radical empathy. All of us can sort of be empathic. Oh gosh, I understand that must really be difficult for you. I understand that's got to be hard. That's a superficial empathy. A radical empathy is really putting yourself in their shoes and learning what they're going through. Not just saying, oh, that must be hard, but reading about it, trying to get to the bottom of what people have actually going through. And if it's the interpersonal relationships in your life, sometimes you really need to gently dig. And what I say as a pediatrician, what I've learned over 40 years as a pediatrician, when I first started, people would come to me and say, well, tell me what I do here, doc. And that was easy. I mean, I was full of book learning. And so I could say, you need to do this or you need to do that. What I learned over 40 years is I needed to, one, listen, and then two, gently peek behind the curtain to see what their situation was and to see how I could help them, how I could empower them, how I could enable them to make the steps they wanted to get to. If I just, as a doc, recognized that, you know, it's tough being a mom, or it's tough being a dad, and I understand what you're going through, but I really don't know what they're going through. I don't know I don't know what's going on inside their head. I don't know what's going on inside their family. I don't know the issues that they're dealing with. So we really need to, I think, exercise radical empathy to understand. I mean, we all have had these circumstances where somebody has committed suicide, and we say, oh, I would never have thought of that person doing that. But we just don't know what everyone's individual circumstances are. So we just need to be more tuned into that. And that's difficult. I mean, because when we go to the grocery store and we get snubbed by a clerk, we're just ticked off that they didn't have good public service. They didn't have good customer service. Well, maybe there's some good reason for them that they didn't have that. So radical empathy is one of those really important things as a parent, because that's what you model for your children. If you just, when you're in a situation and your child's there and you're just ranting about a situation, take a step back, try to put yourself in the other people's shoes, and so you can adequately explain to your child why that encounter did not go as well, and they're not a bad person.
Yeah. One of the things that comes to mind is I was listening to a podcast this lunchtime. It's from a mentor of mine. I listen to his podcast quite a lot. I've been on a few of his courses. An American chap called Michael Neal, and he summed it up really nicely in 2 words, and it was it was about coaching, really coaching or empowering, and the words that he used were loving disruption. Okay, so the loving part would be the radical empathy part, and he said that this empathy and understanding is like a warm blanket, like a warm blanket or a warm bed that you've got into after, and it's been cold, right? So it feels good, but it can be a little bit cloying. It doesn't move us on. He was talking about the disruption as essentially a gentle questioning or challenging or reflecting something back to the person that we're talking to, so that we don't go and say, we're not going, the opposite would be to say, you're wrong, but this was empathy and then gentle questioning to hopefully prompt an insight from our child in this context, the context that we're talking about in our child. What does that make sense?
Oh, absolutely. And that's sort of a skill that's evolved over time in my career. I mean, because I have to, that embracing disruption is what parenting is about. I mean, so many parents that would come into the office say, my child's doing this and I want them to do that. How do I get from A to B? Well, that's not a straight line. I mean, so we need to talk about this, how we can understand that these things are going to happen, and it's not a straight line as to how we get from A to B. There's going to be A1, A2, A3, A4, zigzagging along the way, and so yes, absolutely, that's a brilliant concept in terms of the disruption that life throws us all the time.
So for me, it was you've talked about modeling earlier in the conversation, and it's almost as if people want change, right? Where people are listening to this podcast right now because they want some change, and that change will be catalyzed by an insight. It'll be catalyzed by it'll be initiated by a new thought. It'll be prompted by an epiphany, in just using different language. So that's what drives change in us as parents, and it's exactly the same thing as what drives change in kids. So the name of the game is prompting insights, and what questions do I often talk about this like a command ends with an exclamation mark, and that's the end of the. There's no conversation on the back of a command. When if a kid's running across the road, and stepping off what you would call the sidewalk, we would call the pavement, about to step on, like it's a command, right? It's the end of the. There's no words are required. We're just trying to keep our kids safe. Whereas then you've got a sentence which will, like an instruction might end with a full point, what we would call a full stop, and again that's the end of the conversation. Whereas a question ends with a question mark, and the question mark looks a little bit like a hook, right? And the idea with the question mark is we're trying to draw out the insight. We're trying to draw out the insight from within the child. We're trying to prompt them to see something differently. So change happens when we have these new ideas, these new ways of seeing in the world, and it works exactly for the same for us as it does for our kids.
Absolutely. But one of the things you have to remember for children is that we now know there's reasonably good science that the childhood adolescent brain is not fully developed till age 25. So these insights that you hope you're seeing in your child might be transient, and there's going to be 2 steps forward, 1 step back all along the way. I mean, we've all had those conversations. I can't believe we're talking about this again. We just talked about this last month. You said you were going to do better. You were doing better, and now you've gone back. That is a part of parenting. That is a part of growing up. And if we're honest with ourselves, parents do the same. I mean, we slip back. So that's from the dyad I see in conscious parenting is not just the parent being conscious about the situation, but being consciously aware of where their child is developmentally.
Yeah.
No, that's so important.
So it's like snakes and ladders, right?
Yes.
Yeah. And we're always moving forwards and slipping back, moving forward, slipping back. So in terms of what we see in our kids, then I think you used the word. Did you use the word patience earlier on? I think you did when you talked about characteristics.
Yeah.
So this is a patience game, and I've something just popped into my head about a frustration I used to have leading a small team, and a small team of 5 or 6 employees, and it would absolutely drive me nuts when people didn't do what they said. When they made a commitment, they would actually. This is when they would go below the line, right? So I'd say to somebody, "Can you do this?" And they'd say, "Yes." "What do you want me to do exactly?" I spell it out. "Okay, so when can you do it by? When do you want it for, Simon?" "Okay, I want it. Could you do it? What about a week on Tuesday? Is that okay for you?" "Yeah, that's okay." "Right." So you know that's when I'm expecting it. Yeah. So if something gets in the way and you can't do it for that day, you're going to tell me. Yeah, I'm going to tell you. And then it comes to the day after, and you ask them, how did you get on with that task that you said you were going to do? And they haven't done it. And then they would go below the line. So they would go for the blame, excuses, and denial. And usually they would go for the excuses thing, right? And then I would just be not conscious at that point at all. I would not be choosing my reaction whatsoever, because it used to drive me absolutely nuts. But that's what this is all about, isn't it? It's changing. Changing. I'm saying this with a smile on my face, but it's about. I never saw that clearly enough. If I'd seen that, if I'd seen that more clearly, then maybe I would have done something differently. And maybe if I'd done something differently, I would have had a different outcome. So I'm smiling at it. So I guess I'm forgiving myself in some way. Yeah.
Well, I give an example in the book. You pick up your child after school. Child says, "I'm thirsty." You drive by and get a drink for the child, hand it to the child in the back seat in their car seat and said, "Don't spill this." 2 blocks later, "Mom, my drink spilled." And well, your immediate reaction is just, "Oh, I told you not to do that." And you pull over and you're ready to clean up the mess. If you pause, assess, and choose, you might actually find out there were a different set of circumstances than what you thought. It was that quick turn you took that knocked the book bag into the drink that knocked the drink over. So in some ways, it was the parents' fault that it happened. If they pause, assess, and choose, they might have been able to see and choose a different response. And in some ways, you need to be anticipatory. Are you really setting yourself up? Are you setting your child up for failure by getting a big soft drink and handing it to them in their car seat in the back seat? That does not sound like a recipe for success. So that's where you have to be, anticipate what's happening. But when there has been a failure in behavior, then pause, assess, and choose. In the moment, if you realize in retrospect that moment did not go well, then pause, assess, and choose later. And if necessary, apologize, move forward.
So this is, to me, it sounds like the difference between reacting and responding.
Yes.
Yeah. So that I learned that, or I heard that. I don't know if I learned it, because there's a difference between the two, isn't there? Hearing stuff isn't necessarily learning. But I heard that, wow, it must have been 15 years ago. And your pause, assess, and choose are I think, three great steps in doing that, in responding rather than reacting in the moment. I love you've said it a couple of times now, that you've talked about retrospective as well, because it's not always possible in the moment. A little bit of distance, time-wise, a little bit, and what's the word? It's easier a couple of hours.
Yes.
A couple of minutes, a couple of hours a day afterwards to get that perspective. So I love the way that you keep on. You said it twice or three times now. Is it's easier to forgive ourselves the morning after than it is in the moment.
Absolutely. And that pause, assess, and choose in the moment of retrospect obviously goes beyond parenting, goes beyond all of our interpersonal relationships.
Yeah. So have you got anything specific that you'd like to talk about in terms of the audience, listeners to the show as adoptive parents? Because I know you've done a lot of study around the trauma area. You shared some of the blog posts that you've done on this. What have you got to share with us on that? Well,
there's an incredible amount of scientific evidence now that looks at childhood or adversity and recognizes that early exposure to adverse childhood experiences can lead to changes in brain wiring, brain connections, and we know that it puts children at risk for significant risk-taking adolescent behaviors. But not just that. I mean, when you talk about risk-taking behaviors, you're talking about drugs, promiscuity, a variety of things. But we also know that children that are exposed to a great deal of early adverse experiences are at greater risk for obesity, hypertension, heart disease, diabetes, a variety of things in early adulthood. So recognizing if children have been exposed to those is important. But that's just step one. Step two is, okay, how do we now know that resiliency is not something that's just built in. We have to sort of look to how we can nurture it. And then there's a third concept that gets thrown into the mix. It's called flourishing. The more family connection people have, even in given prior childhood adverse experiences, the more family connection, the more likely the child were to have more positive behaviors going on. So what's the secret sauce? What's the mix here that sort of makes a difference? And it's what we call SSNRs, safe, stable, nurturing relationships. And that hopefully that's what the Thriving Adoptees audience is looking at in their role as parents. They're there to help establish those safe, stable, nurturing relationships. And so I said that some early adverse experiences can change some of the wiring and the connections, but that's not irreversible. Safe, stable, nurturing relationships, removing stressors, and helping children through that journey is what can make a difference going forward. Now, let's be honest, it's never easy and it's never guaranteed that you're going to, even if your child was born in, quote, the most idyllic circumstances and not adopted, everybody has circumstances that life's challenges can be difficult. But especially for children that are adopted, the ability to look at to sort of assess without being judgmental the adverse experiences they were being exposed to, and then look for active interventions to sort of counteract those, to enhance their resiliency and help for flourishing. Because we've sort of broken down stress in childhood into three categories. There's what's called positive stress. Positive stress is the stress that we get exposed to that makes us stronger every day. In terms of if a child falls down, bumps their knee and cries, and then they get right back up and play, that was positive stress, but they got through it. Or getting a shot, getting their childhood shot. Then there's moderate stress, and moderate stress or moderate or tolerable stress is when you get that the child is exposed to a death in the family, or a divorce, or a variety of things. Yet there still is those safe, stable, nurturing relationships to help the child through that. Then there's toxic stress, and toxic stress are those stresses where there's the divorce, there's the death, there's a severe injury or whatever, and nobody around to help. The child that is shunted around from house to house because nobody wants to take care of them or whatever. So the science of those is clear, but we know that none of those is completely a path to horrible life, that there's things we can do in terms of modulating our safe, stable, nurturing relationships. And again, there's a whole host of material on that. And I actually happen to co-author a book on thinking developmentally on that, looking at the science of what's happened early on, and then saying, okay, what can we do now to make a difference going forward?
Yeah. So I had last week I recorded an episode of the podcast with a lady called Danielle Glito, and she was recommending Bruce Perry and Oprah Winfrey's book, What Happened to You, which I'm listening to at the moment. And one of the standout moments I had from that relates to what you were saying about stability. So you talk about SSNR, safe, right, stable, nurturing relationships. And what this book by Bruce Perry and Oprah talks about is that children have been through adverse childhood experiences, arriving in this stable family home and reacting against it because they're used to instability. So they have a challenge, their worldview, their perspective on the world, what they're used to, the environment that they're used to instability. And so stability often initially, this isn't a technical term, freaks them out, right? Because that's what they're used to. And they will sometimes or often try to create instability. And this is what I think people talk about, acting out is a term that's sometimes used for that. So they will try and, because they're trying to create the environment or stimulate the environment to which they are used, which they're used to. And I thought that was incredible. And I thought, if going back to your patience part, your patience characteristic, adoptive parents need to know that happens, because they're thinking, why is Bob's told us about stability. Yes, that's how we're setting up. This is all we're trying to do. We're trying to create stability, and yet the child is fighting back and trying to disrupt that. And it's simply because of the way that they are wired. And obviously what you're talking to in terms of the change and the change that's possible, you're talking about neuroplasticity. I think you're talking about brain wiring and brain connections. So neuroplasticity is the capability that the brain has to change. It's not once and done. It's the brain is forever changing, and safe, stable, nurturing relationships are going to be the key driver of that.
Yeah, I mean, they're the secret sauce for me.
Yeah. So I'm just conscious of time, Bob. So as always, listeners, check out the show notes for links to the guest. I'm going to put a link to Bob's book in there. So the conscious parenting one, and there's obviously he's got other books on Amazon too, and link to his website and where you can catch him on social. Is there anything else that you'd like to share, Bob?
No, I think again, my website I think I'd like to think is a treasure trove of similar information, but just forgiveness is so key to our journey, and let's raise our children to be good citizens that care about each other, and that will take us a long way on our journey toward having a better society.
Yeah, certainly. Yeah, I mean, you've mentioned the divisiveness of societies, and I think having a broader view of our own thriving and flourishing as something that we want for society gives us that is a counter to that selfishness of just being happy. So I'm totally with you on that, Bob, and I applaud the work that you've been doing.
And that's where I said, the 12 words: I am the problem, I am the solution, I am the resource. Let's change the pronoun. We are the problem. We are the solution. We are the resource. Only we can make the difference.
Yeah. Brilliant. Thank you very much, Bob, and I really appreciate you sharing your wisdom with us this afternoon.
Thank you. This has been my pleasure.
Yeah. Thanks a lot, listeners, and we will speak to you very soon. Thank you so much, John. Bye-bye.